Welcome to a special series where I, your servant and your host, Randall Terry, had the privilege of interviewing Dr. Alan Keyes. Hope you'll stay with us for the whole show. I know that you'll be blessed.
Those who forsake the law praise the wicked. Those who uphold the law resist them. Welcome to the Voice of Resistance. Here's your host, Randall Terry.
It's a delight to be with you today, friend. We, Dr. Keyes and I spent about 90 minutes together in comfortable interview setting discussing a wide variety of issues. But it was particularly helpful to hear his perspective on inalienable rights. That these rights come to us from God. And for many of us, it's a phrase. It's almost a throwaway phrase. But Dr. Keyes spends a good bit of time on today's program explaining the direct connection between creation, the creation of man, and our inalienable rights, and what role government plays under God concerning our rights. Hope you enjoy the show.
At one level,
where did it go wrong?
But
where
the
did
situation
the religious
is
right go wrong?
at the beginning, because the beginning is more than half the whole. And when I say the word beginning, one shouldn't think of the start in time. One thinks of that premise or principle from which your action arises and which determines the goal or purpose toward which you go. The Greeks called it telos, I think, and it basically refers to that which is your motive in terms of your aim, and that which defines your end point.
I'm going to guess if you're going to say the beginning, then I'm going with Jerry Falwell. I'm going with the 70s, moral majority.
No,
because
I think that part of the problem is that we didn't and still haven't fully understood. I've tried year after year to articulate it, but people don't see it. The fact that the beginning is more than half the whole means that the premise you start from affects more than half of the consequences that you're going to have to deal with.
Oh, got it, okay.
And we started from a premise in America that was actually a good, solid, righteous sort of premise. It acknowledged God, which is very important, and it listed among the key things.
We're talking about the Declaration.
Stop stealing my thunder.
I feel like I'm interviewing Bill Cosby.
But the truth is, because you have to get there by reminding yourself, the word, if you say the Declaration, it means a certain thing to people. I want to be clear about what I'm talking about before they jump into the fray with their minds and make the Declaration mean what it means today, which is nothing. Do you understand what I'm saying? Nothing. You say the word Declaration of Independence, and immediately people think of two things: equality, freedom. And the Declaration isn't in the first instance about equality and freedom. The Declaration in the first instance is about God and right. And God, because the Declaration is where the founders acknowledged God. And people say, how can you bring God into our politics? And I say, we'd have no politics if you don't acknowledge God. So if you misunderstand that beginning, then you're going to misunderstand everything else. You're actually going to misunderstand the fact that when I am dealing with the right to life, I'm not just dealing with the right to life. See? I'm dealing with something that is the foundation of the whole of American life, the whole way of life we have, and the whole moral character required to sustain that life. And I've always tried to get this across to pro-lifers and everybody else. The issue of life is not a little issue over here that we're concerned about. Well, some other people are concerned about what's happening with the energy crisis, and other people are concerned about what's going on in the Ukraine, and everybody has their concerns, and then we have to kind of negotiate whose concerns are going to be addressed and so forth. No, because that's like saying that people who are arguing over what bedspread we should put on the bed, and others who are arguing about where we should arrange the furniture in the dining room, that their concern is as important as the people who just discovered that there are folks downstairs about to blow up the basement and the whole house is going to collapse. Okay? You say it that way and you realize that some things are more important than other things.
Hierarchy of priorities,
and,
yes.
and life being connected with the whole foundational basis of everything we hold to be decent and right and good in our way of life is not an issue like any other. And when you carry it to such an extreme that you are explicitly denying both the premise and the authority who laid down the premise, both of which are indispensable for maintaining our ability to put into practice the liberty and self-government and economic enterprise that we take so seriously, all of it becomes impossible.
For the sake of the listener, the viewer, your point is the centrality of God in the foundation of the Republic, that our rights come from God, that the Declaration of Independence is a theocentric document, and that the American experiment in self-government, as we saw it, does not even exist without God.
Well, that's true, and also without a certain understanding, because these days, I don't know, the bad guys, as I call them, the folks who are doing everything possible to try to confuse us on the issue of the relationship between God and our citizenship and our liberty and our justice, they play on in various ways. You can see it in the popular culture, trying to get folks, when you hear the word God, you think of, I don't know, old man with a flowing beard. You hear the word God, you think of somebody saying, don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other thing, and so forth and so on. No, the Declaration started, and this I don't think was an accident. See, the Declaration begins where the Bible begins. What's the first thing we're told in the Bible from the very first page? What's the first thing we are told about
questions.
God? No, it's not a trick question. It's an obvious question. In the beginning, right, God, what?
Made heaven and earth.
Created, made. The first attribute of God, the first activity of God listed in the Scripture is creation. No, the Declaration started, and this I don't think was an accident. See, the Declaration begins where the Bible begins. What's the first thing we're told in the Bible from the very first page? What's the first thing we are told about
questions.
God? No, it's not a trick question. It's an obvious question. In the beginning, right, God, what?
Made heaven and earth.
Created, made. The first attribute of God, the first activity of God listed in the Scripture is creation. What do they refer to God as in the
We hold these
Declaration?
truths to be self-evident, that all men are
created equal and endowed by their Creator. So the first thing you're invited to do is think through what creation is about. And I actually think that we can think through what creation is about a little better. You know, we're never going to be able to think it through totally because His ways are not our ways. But we are going to be able to think it through as so far as our understanding can grasp it. And if I think of creation or thought of creation in ages past, examples might be, I don't know, somebody making a wheel. They might be somebody like the guy at the beginning of the movie Patriot putting together a chair. Right?
Mel Gibson.
You think in terms of craftsmen, you think in terms of artisans. You might get to be more complex. You'll think in terms of maybe building a house. And then you get to the concept of the fellow whose ideas inform the house. That's the architect, right? And the sketches he makes and so forth and so on. But as you get more sophisticated, come up to our day in terms of our little understanding of things, you think of computer programs, and you think of the wonderful things that you see on a computer screen or in a digital movie, and all of this images of worlds and so forth and so on. Where does it all begin? It all begins with information. Put in a certain form, processed in a certain way, which then has a certain effect on certain elements of the matter and produces a visual effect or a sound effect or other effects that we then process. So the Creator becomes the source of information, but the Creator also is the one informing and the one what? This is what we often forget. It's not like the carpenter. The carpenter's over here, the chair is over there. The carpenter is in a sense forming the chair, and the chair is being formed by the carpenter. But when the Creator creates, the one informing and the one being informed are the same. Because in the beginning, God. See? Doesn't say in the beginning, God and matter, God and this, God and that. God's working with himself. God doesn't need to work with anything else. That's what creation from nothing means. God doesn't have to work with anybody else. God informs himself so as to produce an outcome that corresponds to his what? What we're told by John corresponds to his word.
In the beginning was the Word.
And people say, where's the word in Genesis? In the beginning, God created, and it summarizes what he created. And what's the first act of creation? And God said. There's the word. Be light.
All right, let's bring it around for me to the centrality of God in the Declaration. I love the parallel between creation in the book of Genesis and the echo of that in the Declaration. But where has the religious right missed it? Why are we in the pickle that we're in?
Because, in point of fact, I think everybody that talks about these things, on the one hand, they will, in the religious quote-unquote context, talk about the primacy of God. But they have accepted an understanding of politics that rejects the Declaration. Because the Declaration
Explain that.
is about the fact that justice, rights, the very institution of government which exists to secure rights that come from God. Mm-hmm. If you exist to secure rights that come from God, then the one who is determining the content of what you're securing is God. Mm-hmm. Yes? So you can't tell me that the American polity can exist in a way that doesn't pay attention to God, because the very substance of our rights, the very substance of justice as far as we pursue it, and therefore the very mission of government as it is understood in the Declaration, is a mission that requires knowing and respecting the endowment of God for the substance of what? And here's the key thing, other place where people go wrong.
The religious right has agreed to a godless discussion about public policy.
But yes, because they've been intimidated by a lie. And most people know it's a lie. Most of the people I talk to who are believers, pro-lifers, people fighting in defense of
I got to tell you this story. Please let me tell you this, because you'll get a kick out of this. I'm determined to not name names unless I change my mind. I took out an ad in 1992, 96, I can't remember now. Yeah, it was 92. I said, Christian beware, full-page ad in the USA Today and full-page ad in Washington Times. And it said, Christian beware, do not put the economy ahead of the Ten Commandments. Mm-hmm. And then I quoted 3 issues where the Clinton campaign had definitively said it was an open rebellion to God. And then it said something like, if we put money ahead of our most sacred beliefs and the commandments of God, how can we expect God's blessing on our country? And then it said something to the effect of, is it a sin to vote for Bill Clinton? When the word got out that we were doing this, we were raising money for a full-page ad in USA Today, I got a call from 3 of the best-known leaders on the religious right, each of them, in turn, imploring me, don't run the ad. You'll make us all look bad. Don't bring God into this discussion. Keep God out of the political realm. And I said, I was so dumbstruck. I said, are you kidding me? What are we, conservative humanists? We hang our beliefs on nothing?
But I think, Randall, it's because of the triumph of the lie. What is the lie? That our Constitution requires the separation of church and state. Mm.
We hang our beliefs on nothing?
But I think, Randall, it's because of the triumph of the lie. What is the lie? That our Constitution requires the separation of church and state. Mm. That's a lie. It has to be a lie, by the way, because as Madison, I think it is, says in Federalist 39. He says that...
Not Federalist 40.
No, Federalist 39. Okay. It's actually Federalist 39, paragraph 2, I think, because the only reason I know that is because or maybe it's not paragraph 2, I lied. But I was just writing something about this where I had to look this up again. And he says there that when they framed the Constitution, okay, and the result that they got has to be judged in light of the principles they fought for during the Revolution. Okay? And the Declaration was the statement of those principles. Yeah. So if the Constitution's put together in light of those principles, you cannot understand it unless you turn on the light of those principles. Yes, that's goes without saying. And the end result is that the principle which says God endowed us with our rights, government exists to secure those rights, which means government exists to secure that with which we are endowed, that which comes from God. How can you tell me then that we can deal with government without dealing with God? That's insane. That's crazy. Not according to Allen's religion, but according to the key statement of political principle on which our whole way of life is based. So when people in the different religious denominations accepted the notion that somehow separation of church and state meant you had to keep God out of politics, God out of the discussion of politics, and so forth and so on.
The discussion of right and wrong.
They discarded the foundation of the polity. They basically were saying it's okay to take this house off of its foundations, it's not going to collapse, and act as if it doesn't require that foundation in order to exist. And then they want to be all interested in the issues that arise because you're no longer constrained by the need to respect the constraints that are involved in the way that foundation is laid out, right? So people want to come down and they want to tear down the walls and they want to destroy various parts of the edifice and they want to poke holes in the roof so that we all drown. And they want to act as if.
But we'll go down singing.
They want to act as if what was supported by the foundation, and very often flooring and other good things like that are in the end supported by the solid foundation, that you can still walk on those floors, even though they no longer have a foundation, that you're not just going to fall into the abyss. And what are things that would be like the floor? One thing that's like the floor is what you're just talking about. You don't know, I think you were talking about it, but you were, and we always are. The family is one of the floors. The family is one of the things that we must build up from and use in order to continue our business and move from one place to another, and so forth and so on as people. And as the word itself implies, and that we are led by people, a lot of these so-called libertarians and other folks want to worship freedom without respect for the natural law of God and all these other sort of things. They want us to act like we can forget this, and yet we can't. That we are, when you're dealing with economics, we think, oh, money. Economics is about money. Why is it called economics, then? If it were about money, it wouldn't be called economics. Why do you say that, Alan? What's so special about that? Because the word economics is rooted in its origin in two words that come from Greek, oikos and nomos. Nomos was the rule that governs the management of something, right? How you deal with it. And oikos, or ekos, was the household, where the family lives, see? So economics is actually about the management of the place where the family lives.
So home economics as a class is actually redundant.
Redundant, yeah. Oh, seriously. It's like a restaurant I once knew on Long Island. It was called Lido Beach, which basically means beach. But yes, it is one of those things that you have to realize, because then what is economics about primarily then? It's about the integrity and strength of family life.
When I was a prisoner in a prison work camp in Alpharetta, Georgia, I had a lot of time on my hands to research who the bad guys were in the death of our culture. And I wrote Accessory to Murder. It is an overview of our political, cultural, media, and religious adversaries that are accomplices to the death of our culture. I encourage you, get a copy of this and learn the who's who of the bad guys.
What is economics about primarily then? It's about the integrity and strength of family life.
What the scripture says, though, that every man could be under his own fig tree. In other words, the sign of God's blessing was that every man was with his family under his own fig tree. Right. Land ownership, peace. My fig tree is the source of food for us. Mm-hmm. And we're not slaves to the government or to the Republican Party.
What that means, what you're saying is the family is self-sufficient. In other words,
yes.
The family must be regarded as a unit that, in the natural scheme of things, is intended to be self-sufficient.
And should have primacy on a great number of levels over civil government. The order of the four governments that God created in the book of Genesis, you have family government, you have self-government, you have church government, and then you have civil government. Civil government was created last, and church family or family government arguably would be first, either that or self-government. So when the government becomes destructive to the family, which is what it is doing right now, it has abandoned its God-given role, number one, and therefore has become hostile to God himself.
Right. Now, what you have just said, put in declaration terms, is easy.
To when secure, a government becomes...
Wait, to secure these rights, government exists to make the rights safe. So if you're doing what's right according to the natural law and will of God, and one of the things that's right is the very first command-like instruction that God gave to Adam and Eve.
Be fruitful and multiply.
Be fruitful and multiply. The first thing he focused them on was the commission, as it were, or mandate, to be fruitful and multiply, to procreate and fill the earth, right? So the family is fundamental. The family is like the first kind of mandate of God. And if government exists to secure these rights, the elementary right would be the rights that are involved in family life. For instance, there is involved in family life a connection. Call it an obligation, call it a tie. But that tie is literally represented physically, isn't it? When the child comes out of the womb, there's a tie between the child and the mother. That literally corresponds to the word ligare, to be bound together. Okay? An obligation and religion and words like this, all of them have to do with being bound in some way to something, bound to God, bound to one another. Well, parents are bound to their children. Children are bound to their parents by ties of obligation that reflect what God has made the substance of our nature, how we preserve ourselves, how we perpetuate the species. All this has to do with how human nature continues through time to exist. So government exists to secure that.
Yes.
Which of the religious folks you know, unhappily, and I will exclude ourselves, who goes out there to talk about what's going on with gay marriage and so forth, points out that you can't force people to accept an understanding of marriage that destroys the essential nature.
Which is
and doesn't respect
God-defined.
that essential nature. And when people say, well, that's not in the Constitution, I always beg to differ with them. No, I'm sorry. Which came first, according to the founders, the unalienable rights or rights that government institutes by law? Well, the answer is obvious. The unalienable rights endowed by God come before or prior to any rights established in human law. In Amendment 9 to the Constitution, we find an instruction that is a prohibition, it's part of the Constitution, that says that nothing in this Constitution, nothing in the enumeration of rights in this Constitution shall be construed to deny or disparage other rights retained by the people. What would be the first set of rights that people had from not just the beginning of the polity or the establishment of the Constitution or the beginning of the colonies or anything, but from the beginning of the world when man was first created? What rights were they? Unalienable rights, the rights that come from God. So of course you can't deny or disparage unalienable rights. It's unconstitutional. Everything they're doing with the courts and on gay marriage and trying to force people to accept and normalize homosexuality, insofar as it interferes with the understanding of marriage and family rooted in the command to procreate and in the activity of procreation, it's all unconstitutional as well as ungodly.
Well, I hope that you are having as much fun watching this as I did recording it with Dr. Keys. If you did not see the first installment, this is a 5-part series, you can go to our website and watch every segment in its entirety. And there's a lot of other material there that are designed to help with how you think. Because right acting usually has to be preceded by right thinking. And that's a critical element of why we do this program. We want you to become a force for righteousness in the earth. And that means our minds have to be properly formed for the task at hand. This is the voice of resistance, and I want you to be a part of the resistance.